So, Cincinnati Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow had a press conference earlier today, stating that he was not happy. He is not happy with his current situation in Cincinnati. He is not happy with his current situation in his personal life. He looked frustrated. He looked exhausted. He looked defeated, and this should be concerning. This should be very, very concerning to us as fans, to Cincinnati Bengals fans, to the Cincinnati Bengals organization. And not just because, I don't think that Joe, and obviously I don't know the guy, but I couldn't see Joe just standing up and walking out like Andrew Luck did um, years ago, even though it was a very similar language that both guys were using in terms of not having fun anymore on the field. I think that Joe loves football, even though Andrew did as well, but I think that Joe loves football and he still loves playing. I just think that Joe is tired of losing. And unfortunately, I don't think things are going to change. And that's why I am personally hoping that this speech from Joe Burrow is more of a warning shot for a trade request rather than a signal that he could possibly retire. Because let's just face it, the Bengals are not going to bite at this whatsoever. Number one, they just signed him to a contract extension, so they have all of the leverage here. Number two, this has been a franchise that historically has been very, very stubborn and cheap when it comes to paying players and adding to their roster. And I mean, you could just look at recent history, for example. I mean, let's not even look at these Joe Burrow teams. Go back to the times of Marvin Lewis and AJ Green and Andy Dalton. I mean, how many of those Bengal free agencies did we see a big time signing to Cincinnati that actually improved them, despite them making the playoffs several years and being a tough team that, was difficult to face, especially in an opening wild card round? How many of those rosters were really improved year to year? They weren't. You really can't name really any. And the same can be said about this era as well. They made the Super Bowl back in 2021. What have they done? They have drafted horrendously to try and rebuild what is a very, very terrible defense outside of Trey Hendrickson, the pass rusher. They have done little to no work at improving their offensive line, who I might add, I don't even believe that this offensive line has been top 25 in the league since Joe Burrow even got there back in 2020. It's been that bad. And Mike Greeny earlier today on Get Up posted a graphic that compared statistics between Joe Burrow and Andrew Luck, and Joe Burrow has played 13 less games than Andrew Luck, and yet has been sacked 29 more times. That's how bad this has really been. Been on the IR 3 times within his career. This will be the third straight season, I believe, that the Bengals have missed out on the playoffs. The only offensive tackle draft pick that they've made is Amarius Mims, I believe, who's been fine, hasn't been tremendous, but outside of that, Orlando Brown Jr. has been awful on the opposite side of the tackles. The interior has just been weak, to say the truth, and that is why Joe Burrow has been in the injury spots that he has been in his career. But outside of that, it's also a coaching issue. And this is another thing that I think that the Bengals have struggled with over time, especially in these recent eras, is they have not really understood when to let their head coaches go. Zach Taylor has been horrendous. We cannot what's the word? We cannot overstate that at all. Zach Taylor has been absolutely terrible for this team. And I think that his mild to little success in this league has been down to the talent that he has had, because he has had Joe Burrow, because he has had Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, because that 1 year in the Super Bowl they had, average to suitable, starting corners like Eli Apple, for example, and a star pass rusher in Trey Hendrickson. And, somebody who can potentially is not a great linebacker, but can be a great leader of the defense like Jermaine Pratt. That's why Zach Taylor has been good. And the start of the season has gotten away from the Bengals more times than it hasn't. They have consistently been playing behind when it comes to the season. And part of that is down to Burrow getting injured early on in the season. But when you look at it, they almost always are starting off 0-2 since Burrow got there and Zach Taylor took over. This is a team that normally starts 0-1, 0-2, 0-3, and is having to play catch up to some of the top teams within the AFC. And this year, I mean, they still do have technically a chance, but they would have to win out, and like the Ravens and Steelers would have to lose out for them to be able to make it. It's that minuscule of an opportunity. They won one game without Burrow. That was towards the beginning of the season as well. Overall, Zach Taylor has not been a great head coach. And more than that, I don't think that Zach has been able to really relate to Joe as much, because Joe's a competitor. He likes to win games. He is fiery about going out and to freaking compete game after game after game. And when I look at Zach Taylor and I see his, I'm not an expert when it comes to body language and all of that bullshit. I don't know that. But when I look at Zach's expressions, when I hear him talk at press conferences, he seems content at times with losing. He has this attitude of, oh, we'll win the next one. We'll win the next one. And sure, you don't want to soak in your losses and allow those to affect you for the next game. But sometimes a quick memory can also be a negative as well, when you can't really understand why it is that you're losing these games, when you can't really understand that you have to protect your quarterback, when you can't really understand that you have to do a better job of utilizing your receivers in better ways. Jamar Chase being used more as a horizontal threat, T. Higgins being used more as in the vertical pass game. It does not help when you cannot make up a scheme defensively that can succeed. And again, I understand that he does not have a lot to work with and that there's not a lot of talent, especially on the defensive side. But when you're sitting up there and you're almost believing that nothing really has to change, that you're just going to get back into this and that Joey B is going to save you, that's not Joe Burrow's mentality. And, I got to be honest, outside of maybe like a Mike McDaniel, I think that Zach Taylor is at the top of my list for head coaching firings this year. I would almost guarantee that he is not on the Cincinnati Bengals sideline next year. And if he is, that is a major reflection of who the Cincinnati Bengals are, what they realistically stand for, and what they measure as success as well, because he should not be a head coach whatsoever. Moving back to Joe. Now, again, is there a chance for him to retire? I sure hope not. I mean, this guy he's an incredible talent, and he's had amazing success in this league despite the limited tools that he has been given. But I also wouldn't be surprised. Injuries take a huge toll on players' mental health. They really, really do. And we're going to continue to bring up Andrew Luck just because there are striking, odd similarities between them. But Andrew's an example. He simply couldn't get out of his head with the multiple injuries that he ended up having throughout his career. And I don't blame him. Joe has also been going through some personal issues. He talked about that in the press conference as well. He didn't reveal what some of those personal issues are. But we do have to remember that this is a guy who had his house broken into last year. That is enough to affect a normal person like me mentally, potentially, let alone, an athlete who knows, could have his address thrown out there, has to obviously protect the people that he loves and his friends and his family. That is a big thing as well. And so when you combine all of that in, it's no surprise that Joe Burrow is very down and somber as he is right now. Now, if it isn't a retirement, and if the Bengals do not shapen up and go out and get offensive line help because they've spent $200+ million on their 2 wide receivers, which, by the way, even though Joe Burrow is calling for that, and Joe does have to take some responsibility for that, he's the one that asked for Jamar and T. Higgins to be able to get paid. I don't think that was the right move. I think that they should have either let one of them go or potentially traded them away to free up cap space and get value for them, especially on that offensive line once again. But they're in the position that they are now. So if the Bengals don't shapen up, the question is, who could trade for Joe? That's the big time question. He does have a no trade clause on his contract, so he could be potentially very, very stingy with the places that he wants to go to, which again, I would not blame him whatsoever. He definitely doesn't want to go from the Bengals situation to, one that's almost as equally worse. But as I look around the league, Las Vegas Raiders, New York Jets, Arizona Cardinals, Minnesota Vikings, some of your AFC North teams, which I understand those are not obviously very realistic because I don't think that Cincinnati would give up Joe Burrow to go to Pittsburgh or to Cleveland, for example. But those are two teams that need quarterbacks. But Minnesota, Arizona, the Jets, and Vegas, and also possibly either the Colts or the Rams. When it comes to Indy, they are very, very unsure of where they're at their quarterback position going forward. We talked about that a little bit the other day in the Phillip Rivers episode. As far as what they do with Daniel Jones coming off an Achilles injury, do you pay him and potentially start him coming off of an Achilles? They still have Anthony Richardson coming off of IR. And that is not a player that I believe that they would really be interested in giving substantial playing time to, especially because they have a competing roster as of right now. And I just don't see a world where Anthony Richardson can develop immediately into a starting caliber quarterback. And then in the case of LA, Matt Stafford is beginning to get to the end of his road. I think especially if LA wins the Super Bowl this year, I think that this would be it. I think that he would retire. If not, I think that next year could be potentially the year for him to go, but it's definitely a lot closer than they want to believe. And there's been a lot of talk about them, potentially moving up in the draft to draft some of the top rookie quarterbacks and get that reset. But I mean, if you could go out and get Joe Burrow and just plug him in and have him with Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, that would be great. And as we've seen in the past, the Rams are no stranger to wanting to give up their first round assets, which, looking at a player as talented as Joe Burrow and as valuable he is to the franchise, we'd probably be looking at a good 3 to 4 first round picks, if not even, a solid player within that as well. Which is why teams like Arizona and Minnesota, once again, are interesting because, again, Arizona, they could trade Kyler. And sure, Joe Burrow and Kyler isn't a 1-to-1 swap, but Kyler and 2 to 3 first-round picks, I think they could take that. Minnesota, they could trade J.J. McCarthy. Again, don't think that J.J. McCarthy is ever realistically going to be a hyper-talented quarterback in this league, but he's young, and you could potentially throw your hat in and go ahead and try and develop him. So J.J. McCarthy and 3 first-round picks, that could potentially be a swap. Would Joe want to go there? Probably not. I think that his top prospect would probably be with the Colts or the Rams because those are two contending teams with 2 head coaches that are offensively minded and who love to compete as well in Shane Steichen and Sean McVay. The final question that I have, though, as much as we talk about those options to be traded to, and I ask this question because, again, I don't know what the likelihood it is for Cincinnati to actually let Joe go because of how valuable he is. If you don't let Joe walk and you don't send him away, who do you get at head coach? You're going to have to fire Zach Taylor, like we mentioned, and hopefully you're going to go out and get some help with players. But again, it's Mike Brown. It's the Cincinnati Bengals. You're not very enthusiastic about that. Who do you get as head coach? There's a couple of solid head coaching options in this cycle coming up. Vance Joseph from my Denver Broncos, although he's defensive minded. And I do think that Joe would want an offensive minded coach, especially with his weapons that he has. But Vance could do a good job fixing up that defense. Joe Brady and Todd Monken from the Buffalo Bills and the Baltimore Ravens. That is potential. Brian Flores from the Minnesota Vikings, who we just potentially mentioned. Those are some of the top guys, in my opinion. There's a couple of others that could potentially be within that mix. But the one I'm going to throw out there, and I think that Cincinnati should really, really look at this. And I understand that some people might not like this, that there's a little bit of controversy to it. But it would be Mr. Nicey himself. Mr. Barstool, I call him now, himself. And that is John Gruden. I understand what John Gruden did a couple of years ago was wrong. Or what people found out about him of what he did was wrong. But he's talented. He's a talented head coach. He's won in this league. He is ultra hyper competitive, is John Gruden. He's offensive minded. And I think throughout his career, he has shown a real strength to relate with whoever his quarterback is. And I think that him and Joe would be a very, very fun duo with each other and what they could do. John has also criticized the Bengals recently, within the past couple of months within the season, asking them to upgrade things for Burrow, to pay certain people, to change up their offensive scheme. I don't know. It's interesting to think about. Would John be interested in that? I think he would. I think that he wants to be coaching in the NFL. Again, I don't know the guy, but I think that he would love to be coaching back in the NFL. I think that that's definitely a want for him. Would the Bengals want to pay him? Because it would be a solid amount of money to pay John Gruden despite his controversy, because he's still a really, really talented coach. I don't know. Probably not, knowing the Cincinnati Bengals. But I think with the offensive mind that you get with him, with his ability to mix in a strong zone running game, along with some explosive plays in the passing game, the fact that I think him and Joe's personalities more or less match up with wanting to win very, very badly, and also the fact that with that I think that John Gruden would really light a fire under the Bengals front office's ass to go out and get things done and to get him players. Because again, he doesn't like losing as well. He did some losing in Vegas, formerly Oakland, when he was there back in the late 2010s. And he was one of the guys that, for example, pushed for the Raiders to get Antonio Brown and whatnot. So I do think that he could potentially push the Bengals to actually making some signings and making some trades and improving that roster. It's just something interesting to think about. More realistically, they fire Zach Taylor, and you probably go out, you get Joe Brady, Todd Monken, Mike Kafka from the New York Giants. You get people like that. But if you want to go all out, and I think at this point they need to with how Joe is speaking, I think that John Gruden could potentially be the guy. But let me know what you think about all of that down below in the comment section. What do you think about Joe Burrow's comments? Do you think that this is a warning shot for a trade request? Do you think that this is a signal for him to potentially walk away from the game? How do you think that the Cincinnati Bengals should approach this? Who should they go for when it comes to a head coaching search? Or if they decide to send Joe Burrow away, who would you want to see Joe Burrow play on? It's a lot of very, very interesting questions to answer, so answer all of those down below, as well as subscribing to the channel, leaving a like, and sharing with your friends. And by the way, if you haven't already, what are you doing, my man? Go ahead and follow us on all social medias, that being TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. All those ads are going to be down below. We're on all of those social medias. You will get to see my latest reaction to breaking news in the NBA, the NFL, and combat sports. And by the way, you will also never miss for whenever the podcast decides to upload an episode. And without further ado, guys, that's all that I have for you guys today. I will see you guys on the next one. Hope that you guys have a great rest of your weekend. And peace.